The first thing I do with a client is I rip up that sales process, I reconfigure it to reflect the buying cycle, qualification criteria, then you look at the sales process. So I think for me that's been the biggest shift in selling and buying in the past 10 years. It's that ability to understand, question, become a partner with your client.
I use it to create images for slide decks. I think it's incredibly powerful. As a buyer, I obviously get tons of messages every day. As soon as I have identified that I've received a message that has been written by AI, that seller is blacklisted to me.
Now you may choose to say, okay, I've found a market buying intent signal. I want to personally phone that person up. I want to craft them a personalised email. I want to track what events they're going to and try and bump into them at the event and have a conversation.
We're really talking about the role of outbound sales. What's your take on that?
And this role called customer success came along 5 years ago, and then everyone said that's the next best thing to help.
You have a product that solves a problem that the market cares about and that you can communicate that value effectively. Only half of that is a sales and marketing issue. Scaling a fintech is super tough. I've been part of the journey for 2 fintech unicorns and have become obsessed in cracking the code. Join my guests and I, they're all experts in their field, founders and operators, as we attempt to find the secrets and share them with you. Welcome to the Hive Mind. Hey everyone, we've got a slightly unusual go-to-market Hive episode today. I've got a guest, Antony Bream, who's another go-to-market specialist, and we're going to be talking about some of the hot button topics within the sales and marketing industry. Antony, good for you to join me.
Thanks for having me, James. Nice to be not an enemy, but a friend.
Great. So I think we talked about some of those main topics that we wanted to talk about, and actually I put that out onto LinkedIn. So should we get started?
Yeah, love to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the big one, and we could be here for a while, is what are the main mistakes that you see vendors making from a go-to-market perspective?
Really good question, and quite a broad one. I think when I work with a client, I always say, think with the end in mind. And I'm a bit of a fan of Stephen Covey, and one of the 7 habits that I've always picked up on that he wrote about 20 or so years ago that's really played well for me and my clients is start with the end in mind. So if you're setting up a company and you want to sell that company in 3 years, 5 years, you want to IPO, really, really think hard before you start the train leaving the station, your endpoint, and work back from that. Because I think every decision you make, every corner you turn, every pivot that you might have to be making to make the company survive, you've always got to ask yourself the question, does this decision get us closer to that end goal, further apart, or static to where we're standing today? And I think that really focuses the mind. It really makes the decision-making process a lot clearer. And not many of the people that I've worked with or have heard about or read about have that mentality. And I think that makes it a more difficult journey for them to get to where they actually want to get to. It's very difficult to keep that North Star focus when there's so many decisions that need to be made. And they're often technical decisions, people-based decisions, marketing, competitors. There's so much noise out there. I think the second thing that I see people not doing as much as they can do or should do is looking at the data to help them make those decisions to be informed. So instinct always plays a big part, but I think there's so much data out there now in terms of competitors, in terms of what the market's looking for, the buying signals from the buyers. Fascinate yourself anally about data so that you can take those decisions quickly, confidently, and be assured with the direction of travel to give you the confidence as the founder, because a lot of the people working for you will be looking at the confidence in you. And if you're not looking confident, you're looking chaotic, stressed, tired, emotional, that will feed through to the company. So you've got to keep that motivation and that energy and that direction of travel really clear. So use data to give you that clarity. And I think the third thing I'd pick up for now is hire the right people at the right time into the organization. So classically, you hire good people and you spend a lot of money and time hiring good people. You also let lots of good people down, because you have to make a decision on the person for the role. But bear in mind that as you grow your company and scale it and change it, they may not be the right people a year down the line, 2 years down the line. You might need to find somebody else with a different skill set, different experience, different mentality. So even though it's hard to let people go, doesn't necessarily mean you need to let them go. You can maybe move them to a different role. And I think actually a firm that I work for a while ago, we actually hired lots of graduates into our support line. Most of those graduates who did a year out from university on the support line learned so much about the product and the clients, they made really good salespeople or customer success people. So look at your team, look at who you've got, where you've got them, and ask yourself almost on a regular half-yearly basis, is this the right mix of people for where we are today? Do we need to think about moving, changing to get the right people in? So I'd say there are three off the top of my head that I think I see quite commonly. I'd love to get your views on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll actually comment on one of yours, which is a great point, which is the right people at the right time. And both Christian Nentwich and Dexter Cousins, my previous guests, have said very similar things. And I think there's a lot of stigma about relatively short tenures. And I think a lot of that, particularly in businesses that are growing and changing fast, is really unfair. And actually, you know, if the business is changing and growing, I think your point is really well made. Actually, you've got a skill for the right time, and you know, nothing has to last forever.
Yeah.
For my part, I think probably one of the biggest mistakes that I make is businesses that don't invest enough in marketing. And marketing is actually a really big word, and it could probably benefit from some definition. So when I talk about marketing, I'm talking about communicating one to many rather than one to one, and purely because it's just more efficient, particularly where you don't have a buyer that's got a developed sense of need. And so that communication one to many is just far more cost effective and just generally effective than a lot of outbound sales. So I think, you know, I see regularly people have, you know, half a dozen or more salespeople and a marketer. So they're weighted, you know, very badly. That's one of the things that I would say. The second is that I don't think people activate content and social media nearly as well as they could do. I mean, I think we live in an age where individual authority and brand is hugely important to the success of the company. And I'm always really, I see disappointed, borderline dismayed when I see how few CEOs and executives are visible as the heads and faces of their company. And also how few salespeople kind of take that initiative and they just essentially use LinkedIn as a business card. They go and meet someone face to face. They'll fire them a connection, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that's always a little bit distressing to see, because I think it's such a powerful tool and costs nothing but a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And the third, and these are quite kind of tactical ones. Yours was a very strategic point, but mine are more tactical. The third is I see loads of companies train their people on how to sell, but no one seems to understand how organizations buy.
Yes.
You know,
100%.
No one is a student of actually understanding the buying process.
Yeah.
And particularly in the industry that you and I serve, in banks, they have a very formal way of buying. There's a governance that surrounds it, and planning, and, you know, financial strategy and prioritization. And if you don't understand all of these things, all of the sales skills in the world are completely redundant.
Yeah.
So, you know, seeing businesses that are, you know, training on medic, but they just don't understand the buying process is a huge waste. Yeah.
And this is a big topic of mine, because when I was doing my sort of junior selling, and I think, you know, the question I guess that is worth asking is, are salespeople naturally good at selling, or can you train somebody who's maybe technical, or you know, and maybe they're good at maths and they're a founder of a, you know, very, very clever technology product, but can you actually train non-salespeople to be salespeople? And when I went through all of my sales training back in the day, you know, Holden Power Base and all the wonderful account-based selling, it really intrigued me, because for the first time ever I was given some tools, some questions, some frameworks that I could use when I go into a client meeting to give me a structure, to allow me to ask the right questions, to allow me to feel that I'm doing my job properly as a salesperson, but in a way that is structured and in a way that other people can look at the results of that and understand it. So that really sparked my, I guess, academic interest in selling. And I find it fascinating in terms of the process of selling, but you're 100% right. The shift has happened over the past 10 years. A salesperson was a prescriber of pain for a client. We were trained to find the pain the client couldn't see or didn't have the time to see, but it's now shifted to the buyer having the control of the process. And the buyers are becoming more and more internally attuned to doing their own selling in their own organization. They have to sell the budgets that they've submitted for resource, for money. They have to sell their own positions, their own teams to survive with changes in companies and for promotion, and being a senior manager of any company carries risk and reward. And I think I've got to the point now with my clients where the first thing I say is you don't have a sales process until you understand the client's buying process. Your sales process has to align to every single stage in that 6-stage process that the client goes through. And at each stage, you need to ask yourself the question, how do we add value to the buying cycle, to the right person in the company that we're trying to sell to? And unfortunately, there's all of these wonderful CRM systems that out of the box give you a sales process, a sales funnel. But to me, they're just the tick boxes of what you should do academically to position yourself, as a competitor, as a vendor, but they don't reflect on the client's buying cycle. The first thing I do with a client is I rip up that sales process, I reconfigure it to reflect the buying cycle, qualification criteria. Then you look at the sales process that supports that. But you also look at it every single quarter and you look at the numbers and the reports and the analysis and you tweak it and change it to make sure it's as best as it can possibly be. So I think for me, that's been the biggest shift in selling and buying in the past 10 years. It's that ability to understand, question, become a partner with your client. And I've often sat in a client's office on a whiteboard, drawn up what I think is their buying process and asked them to comment on that and reflect how they think it looks in their own organization. And I've seen many a client sit back and go, goodness me, I never realized I was part of that process. I never realized that I was a client to somebody and I've got a client who triggers me in that process. And I've been a little bit blind to that. So now that I understand that, I can now work more effectively in my own organization and I can help you along that journey as well if you've got that relationship.
I agree 100% on the change that we've seen in the last 10 years. And that buyer-centric process manifests in all sorts of bad data. You talked about data earlier on and things like forecast accuracy or a weighted pipeline. Now, if you don't have those opportunity stages in the CRM that are reflective of how people buy, the data that you get out of it is terrible. So I do exactly the same thing that you do. When I go into a client, 80% of them have CRM stages that are a sales process, not a buyer process. And I flip that around immediately and forecast accuracy just shoots up. So it's a great point. And you also alluded to this, which is the change in buyer behavior. They are less dependent on salespeople than ever before to do that initial research. And that ties back to both the sales and the marketing component, which is how do you allow buyers to an extent self-service their informational needs to the point where they're ready to raise their hand and go, okay, I'm now ready to have a conversation. And I think that's why a really closely aligned sales and marketing team are so important, because it really is the same thing, isn't it?
And yeah, I see silos still today with sales teams and marketing teams. And it's kind of a master and servant relationship, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be a frictional relationship either. I see friction between sales and marketing because there's a lack of clarity in terms of who's responsible for what. And the salesperson is sitting there going, generate me some leads, generate me some leads. Marketing should be my lead generating mechanism. And marketing is sitting there going, we're here to promote the brand, the people. We're not a lead generating mechanism. We're far busy doing press releases and events and announcements. Sales should do the lead generation. Then you get the SDR who sits in the middle, and then you've got the product management team who are blind to the information that's being shared between between sales and marketing. So I think generally to me as well, as an observation on the back of your point, sales and marketing functions need to be absolutely joined at the hip, 100%, looking at each other's data, learning from that, changing tone, messaging, asking each other the question, have we got the ideal customer profile nailed? Are we selling to the right person? And actually being the conscience of each other. And I think sales are kind of seen as the maverick side of the organization and marketing more the, steady hand on the tiller. But I think ultimately both need to be working together, sharing the information that they're getting, discussing it, understanding the meaning of it. And I think 2 lessons that I've learned for clients that I've worked with is you sort of mentioned the people that lead the business don't get much visibility. People still buy from people. You need to really match the person that's representing the company from the C-suite to the right people in the industry. You'll have a clever technician, you'll have a clever natural salesperson, you'll have a brain box, you'll have an introvert, you'll have an extrovert. Line up the right people with the right ICPs. And I think the second lesson I've learned is always punch above your weight. So if you can represent your company to be 10 times bigger than it actually is from clever marketing, whether it's through the website, the use of social media, a clever use of LinkedIn or whatever it might be, if you can punch above your weight in the market, clients recognize that, and it gives you more of a chance to win business as a smaller firm growing if you can represent yourself as a big firm.
If you are a smaller business, so critical. I don't think a lot of people realize if you are a salesperson at Oracle or Salesforce and you call through to the office of the CTO, your chances of getting through are significantly more than an unknown scale up, because there is an established brand behind you, and the role of that content builds a presence that you otherwise would have to take 30 years to build your reputation. It helps the market know who you are. And I often refer to it as, the content is oiling the doors that you want your salespeople to open.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And I'm a great fan of Geoffrey Moore, the technology innovation curve, who, again, 20 years ago or so, probably about the same time as Stephen Covey, came out with this analysis of technology innovation, of how you have to find the early adopters. You're selling to an IT team that has a budget that you need to get them to reallocate to get in there as an early stage company. Then you have to find the early adopters that are prepared to take the risk. And then you get into this wonderful tornado where you've hit the right market, the right people with the right message, you're proven, you've got use cases, and then basically you're selling as much as you can to maximize the market opportunity. And then you hit the downward trend and you're commoditizing, and you're then dealing with procurement on negotiating, renewals of ELAs. And again, going back to my point earlier, think with the end in mind, imagine that technology innovation curve from the back end of it to the front end. So we're being commoditized. We're dealing with the procurement team on an ELA renewal. They want discounts, right? Work your way back to the start of that curve to really allow you to sort of get that foresight and that knowledge bank of how do we accommodate that in 2-3 years' time. And I've worked with clients where when they've hit that tornado, it happens very quickly. You've got a 6-month window to really start to think, how do we scale the business and go out there and make the most of this opportunity? And the ones that have planned it properly do it well. The ones that haven't even thought about it get lost in the tornado. They get spat out, never to be seen again, falling off a cliff. So there's a lot of really good, well-trodden practices out there. And there's a lot of people like you and I that have that experience and knowledge and know-how that I think firms tend not to actually look for outside expertise. And I think it's a bit of a UKism. Some Be the Business, I read a report a while ago that said, UK productivity, is already sort of seen as being low compared to G7. One of the messages or learning points that they came out with from an analysis was UK firms tend not to ask for expert advice more than the G7 firms do. That's one of the reasons why their productivity is low. UK entrepreneurs tend to be quite confident in their own selves. They've come through a good education path and are quite confident, but they don't have the ability to say, actually, I want to ask for help, get external, and that to me is a bit of a chink in the chain in the UK market, I think.
You made a really good point, though, which is when the market moves, it happens quickly, and you either grab the opportunity or you lose it. And when it comes to having an advisor, I don't think it's because the founders are intrinsically unable to solve the problems on their own. It's the amount of time it takes them in terms of mental bandwidth and the amount of iteration it takes them, and that they might iterate their way to the right answer, but if they've missed the train, the opportunity cost is massive. So it's not a lack of ability, it's just helping get people to the right answer or an effective solution as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And then you're looking at every aspect of your business, the pricing model, you know, are we pricing it the right value, the right way? Are we matching how the client's buying from the market? Again, do we have the right people at this point of scale, at this point of the next 6 months are going to be chaos? And I've worked with clients that have gone from 5 employees to 15, from 15 to 50, from 50 to, you know, 5,000 post-acquisition. That journey of scale is really hard for any company, from the founders, the C-suite, to the people on the ground, because the method of communication changes. The chat with the founder over a coffee, you know, which was a 10-minute chat, now becomes a 1-minute chat if you're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a paradox out there called the Abilene paradox, which says people become less productive because the message from the senior level gets distilled as it gets pushed down through the ranks. And so firms at scale will then suddenly find that you'll have little pockets of people who are assuming what they heard the directors or the founders or the board say, this is our objective, this is our mission. But because it gets diluted down and it doesn't get mentioned enough or clearly enough, people naturally will start to take their own perception or assumption or view of that. And it's different per group.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with a client who was about 100 people, large or small. In their view, they were large, they were growing. And I walked into this open plan office where everybody sat in their functional areas. It was one of the most dysfunctional companies that you could possibly see. They had sold very well in the market. They had lost their mojo, their way. They had a product manager that was dictating the tone of the office, not very well. And look, you know, we ended up going through Myers-Briggs and getting people to understand that people act and work and communicate differently. And we managed to sort of, you know, segment people into different Myers-Briggs categories. And it was a revelation in terms of people sitting back going, I'm in marketing, I sit opposite the product management team, I haven't got a clue what they're saying, or I don't understand what they're asking me to convey. Not because they're not explaining it, it's because the individual sat opposite me is a different type of person to me. And just recognizing different personnel types. And now we have obviously, you know, ADD, ADHD, we have different categorizations of people's way of thinking and working. Are open plan officers the right environment for somebody with a tendency to have ADHD? I think the evidence is not. So is the environment right for the people? Are we getting the best out of people? You know, are we looking after and caring for our people? And of course, going back to selling, it's very stressful. It's very emotional. You're very visible. You're the first to get fired when it goes wrong. You know, you're carrying that with you. And when you close a deal these days, the days of having a celebration are over. You go to find a corner in a dark room, curl up in a ball and try and get over what's been a stressful time in your life to recover. And is anyone there to pick you up and, you know, support you?
Very, 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 very true. I think that one of the lowest parts in my professional career was after I closed the biggest deal of my life. And you don't hear about that.
Yeah. You're expected to turn up the next morning and perform again, and it's not that easy for anybody. Yeah.
You made an interesting point about what scaling looks like. And another one of the things that I've observed is that when you have small organizations, the communication is very much osmotic. Like the standards and the ways of working, if it's, you know, 20 people and the founder's 6 feet from you, they are an ever-present force telling people the bar that they need to raise to. But when you go to 100 people, the founder is abstracted away by layers of management. That is inevitable. And suddenly the quality drops because it actually hasn't been documented. And I'm not just talking about processes, because processes are like, you've got to follow these steps and they can be quite restrictive, but actually the standards of the business, like when you do each individual piece of work, how do you know that it's been done to a good enough standard? And going through that process of actually capturing that in writing, I think is a really important step a lot of businesses have to go on. Otherwise the quality dips and no one quite understands why. It's because they've introduced these additional layers without documenting things.
Yeah, and you know, I do a lot of coaching as well as sort of consulting with clients, and one of the biggest things that comes up coaching founders is imposter syndrome. When you really get beneath the surface of the person that, is leading this company forward and asking people to follow them in a brave fight, and, would you jump off the cliff with me? They are struggling with imposter syndrome themselves, and that only surfaces up when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of the individual, the person who's vulnerable, who's got, lots of pressures happening at home, probably as well as at work. Founders especially so, because they've got lots of risk they're carrying around with them that they have to hide. So there's also that uncovering of the individual characteristics of people. And this is before they've got out to sell their product to a very tough market to sell into. So I think really taking care of your staff, your team, yourself, getting the experts in that can help get these nuances out there is really important, to just get everyone fully functioning and to take care of the people that aren't, because, everyone's going to have their ups and downs and their good days and their bad days, but don't expect people to go to war in sales without the right tools and the right, ammunition and the right, bulletproof vest, because it's tough out there. So keep an eye on them. Yeah.
One of the things that actually people on LinkedIn requested we talked about was the future or the current status of SDRs or BDMs, whatever you want to call them. But we're really talking about the role of outbound sales. What's your take on that?
It's definitely changing. I mean, we saw this role called customer success, come along 5 years ago, and then everyone said that's the next best thing to help keep that revenue stream that we spent so long and hard obtaining from a client. So one of the shifts that we've seen in the past 10 years has been, the on-premise model moving to SaaS, so subscription and annual recurring revenue. And it's, made people find smaller deals, but land and expand. So get a small deal quick and land and expand across that client and maintain that client, because the recurring revenue, the subscription revenue, is what your company is being measured upon by the analysts, by the investors, by the markets. Customer success came along to try and keep that momentum, to keep the value. But then, suddenly customer success were a cost of sale, cost of operation, and that role is now diminished. I think Salesforce took a swipe of their customer success teams post-COVID because the cost of running the business had gone up. And I think the SDR role, the BDM role, is slightly in the same scope of danger because of the use of AI and the tools that are coming out now that are very, very credible, they're proven, that are providing buying intent signals in the market. And I think you still need the role of an SDR that has the right tools to understand the buying signals in the market, so they can feed that through to the sales teams, and they can allow the sales teams to chase the deals that are real, that are credible. And you and I would have spent in our career chasing quite a lot of red herring deals that never actually happened, for reasons out of our control. But the market data, the buying intent data that shows you who's in the market looking to buy, that I think is where SDRs will still play a role, but they've got to have the right tools and the right data to do that role effectively, and allows them to then start to, sell into the people that are looking to buy the messaging of the company, the value of the company. And I've always been a big believer, when I sit in front of a client as a salesperson, I don't want to have to tell them about my company and my products. I want to ask them questions about their company, about their, challenges, about their requirements, because an hour is 50 minutes, sometimes 40 minutes. So, why spend 40 minutes telling them something that they should already know about your company? You should spend 40 minutes spending 30 of that 40 asking questions and 10 confirming back. So the SDRs really are kind of the brand representation team, but give them the right tools for the job, and then let them give the sales team the qualified leads. They can then go and close those deals as well.
I mean, my personal opinion on SDRs is I've actually got a few conflicting opinions, and I'm on the fence as to the value of SDRs in 2025 in general. I think on one hand, we talked earlier about the self-directed buyer, self-serving their informational needs. And I think that trend makes buyers less inclined to want to use an SDR as the first point of call for that education. Having said that, I don't think you're ever going to get 100% effective coverage just from effective marketing, even if you do it perfectly. And I think an SDR channel is good. I wouldn't scale it to the same extent that it's been used even 5 years ago. I think you're really just trying to nudge people into conversations rather than take them from being ice cold.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I've observed in terms of how it needs to be executed, I think a lot of the time there is poor training, and I wouldn't even bother implementing an SDR function unless you have a really good leader. I've seen a load of SDR functions that have essentially been laid off because they were set out to drift without a strong leader, given a load of email sequencing tools, and they become quasi-marketers as opposed to salespeople. I think they need to be trained. They need to be managed on activity. If you do not have the internal infrastructure within your business in terms of management and the tooling that you talked about, they will fail.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's something that you can very easily dip your toes in. I think if you are a small enough business that you can only afford a single SDR, then I think the challenge is more to find a good agency, an outsourced agency that can provide that. Like anything, there are some really good agencies, there are some really bad agencies. So you've got to find the right one. But I don't think you can hire a single SDR unless you've got someone that is going to really teach them the craft as well.
And I think I agree with you on that point. Now I think about it, because the AI tools that are out there, and I use them myself for my client work, are getting so sophisticated now. They are in real time providing you with the buying signals in the market that are suggesting that somebody that you may not know of is looking to inquire and or purchase a product or a service. And by turning on the right signals, you can then basically come into your office on a Monday morning, click, onto your laptop, and you'll have a list of firms and people that are showing signals to buy, whether it's they've raised some money, they're hiring certain types of people, they're talking on a social media thread about a particular issue they've got. They're deemed to be a thought leader in the industry that they're representing, and the comments they're making line up with your product. And many different buying signals that, when you sort of line them up together, start to say, actually, what we think we found the needle in the haystack here. Now you've got a short window of time, because one of those other buying signals could be they're talking to the competition. It's a tool that I use that actually shows you put in your competitors, it will say this person in the industry that could be a buyer is engaging with your competitors, through LinkedIn messaging or sharing posts or whatever it might be.
So it's mapping your ICP clients against mentions of your competitors.
Yeah. So this person's reaching out to maybe the better known firms in the industry. That's a buying intent signal. So you've got a short window of time to then go and reach out to that person to make them aware that you exist and what you've got and why you're different. So I think, reflecting on your point, I think the role of the SDR will diminish, because AI will allow you to then send a personalized, automated outreach. And the tool that I use for that will give you that personalized, automated outreach specific to the signals that have come through to say, do you agree this is a ICP that's showing intent to buy in the right area? Yes. Here is the sequence via LinkedIn, email, video call, phone call, voice message on LinkedIn, whatever it might be, that allows you to connect with that person in a personalized way. The AI can do all of that.
I think it's a good time to talk about AI, because there are lots of different types of AI tools. I mean, we could probably talk for 3 hours on AI, but I'll go first on that. Let me start off by saying that ChatGPT is now the single most used application on my desktop. I use it for a ton of stuff. Some really good use cases for it. I've built a number of websites, so I use it to write or rewrite really clear copy. If I'm doing a proposal, I find it has a very neutral tone of voice, so it's good for just clear communication. I think it's great for that. I use it to create images for slide decks. I think it's incredibly powerful for that. So the use cases are numerous, but there are some use cases that I really, as much as I want to, struggle with. And actually using AI as part of a copywriting in sequences is something that I don't think works at the moment. Let me explain. I think AI smells. And what I mean by that is it's it's identifiable. You can tell it's AI.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know quite how you know it's AI, but something deep inside you says that wasn't written by a human. It gives itself away in almost imperceptible ways. And I believe that as soon, if as a buyer, I obviously get tons of messages every day.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I have identified that I've received a message that has been written by AI, that seller is blacklisted to me mentally, because it demonstrates a lack of caring enough about me as a buyer to want to put in the effort. So actually, I think any AI response that is identifiable and is identifiable as AI is more damaging than just generic content.
Yeah.
So I think it has the risk of being really counterproductive. So the bar for the AI needs to be so high as to be genuinely indistinguishable from a human. In this particular use case, just in the cold outreach, as I said before, I think there are lots of other use cases of AI where I'm really happy. I just haven't made my peace with that one yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, look at this stage in the game, AI is evolving, it's new, it's definitely has its pros and cons, but I think really to help people sell, in this environment, you've got to give them as many tools as possible to let them decide how they use the data from that tool. Now, you may choose to say, okay, I've found a market buying intent signal. I want to personally phone that person up. I want to craft them a personalized email. I want to track what events they're going to and try and bump into them at the event and, have a conversation, a good old chat. Remember those days when you go and talk to your clients to sell them something through a chat rather than a Teams call? So I think, look, people need as many tools as possible, as much data as possible, and the flexibility to adopt, either an AI-based approach or a hybrid, or, this is not the way we want to work as a business. We want to, go in as a personal connection. But as I say, I think punching above your weight allows you to appear bigger than you actually are. And I think that still holds some strengths in the market. But if we look at the stats, typically for an enterprise B2B sales process, the client's 2/3 of the way through their buying decision process before they reach out to vendors. And on average, there's between 6 to 8 stakeholders that are all making the decision on, do I buy A or B? And your job as a salesperson, as an organization, is to get into that buying cycle as early as possible, to find as many of those stakeholders as possible, to figure out who's the go-getter that's going to really hammer their fist on the table at the board meeting to want my solution, not the competitors, who's going to waste my time, who's the person that's going to come out of the woodwork at the final hour and kill the deal. And I'm sure you and I have both had that experience where you've done everything you can possibly do to get the business. The board meeting is sitting down. The decision is being made to recommend your product, your company's product, to the board for an approval. And the CTO sits there and says, hold on a minute, we've already got one of those. We've already got an ELA with a vendor that can do something similar. I've got a team that can go and build that for us. And I've had a few situations where that's happened to me, and it's the most crushing experience as a salesperson. You've done everything you can possibly do. The one thing that you've failed to do is find that person that's going to kill the deal. And that's still the case now. And whenever I talk to a client about their sales cycle, their qualification process, the thing that I constantly say to them is, have you found the person that's going to kill this deal? And if you haven't, there's somebody out there that's going to kill this deal. Go find them. And if you can't find them, get your sponsor to go and find them for you. Because if they are a true sponsor of you in the business, they will also have the same concern that you've got, or they will know who that person is or could be. And I've actually had a client, sit back and say, yeah, I think you are right. I think I probably know who that person is. Let me go and sort it out.
Coming from our previous point on AI, I think you started talking about enterprise, and it raises a really interesting question because, I'm giving my recommendations, but actually to sprinkle a little bit of context on that, AI and automation and volume is, if your market is huge and you have a low value piece of technology, something that's maybe tens of thousands, then actually automation will help you reach that market quickly. And it doesn't matter if a good percentage of them don't like AI. All you need to do is unearth a reasonable amount of people that accept it,
Yep.
and it's cost viable. You started talking about enterprise, which is obviously my expertise as well. So you're talking deals of hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of ARR. And I think a lot of the time in that case, it comes back to the same craft that it's always been about people, like this kind of mental game of chess and anticipating things that are coming down the track. And I just don't think technology has a big role in that, with the exception that I think GPT and other AI tools are probably a good deep account research, but it still is more based on those fundamental sales craft skills, I believe.
Yeah, and I think, look, if you go back to my point earlier, I think the end in mind, the technology innovation life cycle curve, work back from that. Maybe the conversation you're having with the client as an advisor is, fine, let's work back. So you've hit that tornado, you've hit the mass market. At that point, do you want to employ 30 salespeople supported by 10 SDRs with a marketing team of 8, which is a cost base of 5 million? Or do you want to deploy AI? Because you've got a 6-month, 3-month window to go and maximize the opportunity to sell to that market. That market's in buying mode en masse. Yeah. It's basically take as much off the shelf as possible as quickly as you can to solve that problem, realize that opportunity. So is the question at that point, you then think about planning to bring AI into your business to automate more of that, or do you upload the cost of your business with people? And again, I've seen, clients of mine that have scaled from the UK to the US, Middle East, etc., where they employ local people and they've got black contact books and they think they're the bee's knees because they've got a black contact book and experience. 6 months into that tenure, they submit very expensive lunch bills for expenses for nothing to show in the pipeline. 12 months later, they're out the door. They've failed.
I agree 100%.
So,
I have seen so many occasions where people are hiring for a black book. We want someone with a network, and I stand by that it is a terrible idea because it assumes that the people in that black book are the ones with a buying agenda. It's not. Buyers will buy based on need, not based on a relationship. Like, this isn't the 1950s. Maybe if you're selling something incredibly low value, like, cups and saucers, but you do not go out and buy SAP's ERP system because the guy that you've known for 10 years is a sales guy there. And the suggestion is frankly ludicrous.
And you're watching your cash runway disappear, and suddenly you've then got to go and reach out to the investment community, and the term sheets are horrible, and you lose control of your business and you fail. So I think ultimately, it goes back to that, think with the end in mind. At what stage do we want to investigate, think about how much has it progressed? The needle in the haystack's got bigger. It's got harder to get into the field where the haystack sits. And then once you've got in the field, it's getting harder to find the needle. So you then have to say to yourself, right, do we look at marketplace communities? Do we go and list ourselves on the Salesforce App Exchange? Because there's a platform that has a market already looking for solutions, that has a community, that has, the security of a big brand name business that is financially sound, is a marketplace opportunity, one that we should be considering. Partner channel, referral, reseller, digital sandbox environment. So Nair One, who you probably know, have launched, these fantastic digital sandboxes, FCA registered, connected into Swift, billions of data points for synthetic testing. Firms that are looking for solutions can find them on the marketplace. They can do a 6-week testing program versus a 6-month testing program. Make a decision within 3 months, not three years. Some of the sales cycles you and I've been involved in have gone on for probably up to a couple to 3 years. So really, really looking at alternative ways of selling as well, I think is important for firms, because there are opportunities out there like a marketplace, a sandbox. I advise my clients within financial services to look at the trade bodies, the PIMFAs, the IAs of the world that, have those people in the room that you want to be talking to in an environment that is mutually collaborating and sharing. I've got a problem. Can you help me fix that problem? No longer are you selling, you're consulting and selling, but you're doing it in a way that's not cold outreach. It's, hey, I'm part of your community, but I can work with you to help solve this problem. And I think this type of selling now, you've got to help your client find those pockets of hidden risk and opportunity in their own business. And if you can find them and, replicate that and build a use case and you can sell a product for that, that's where you're going to make the magic happen, because you're helping your client understand their business better than they are. And in most cases, an external looking in, you can. Embedded finance, open banking, two perfect examples of some clever people that have found an opportunity to say, there's an opportunity here to sort of find some hidden opportunity, BMPL, or hidden risk in a business that I can help a client understand and create a business case for. So you're a consultant as well as a salesperson these days, not just purely selling.
One of the last questions that I think people wanted us to talk about was the role of the chief revenue officer, and whether there should be a chief sales officer and a chief marketing officer, or whether those two heads should be unified under a CRO. What's your thoughts?
Well, I've seen the role of chief growth officer coming up more and more now. So I think fundamentally sales and marketing need to be joined at the hip. They shouldn't be separate functions. They should be the same function reporting to a person, whether it's a chief growth officer. The title's kind of irrelevant. The principle is they need to be working more closer together. And I just see this divide and this friction still between the two functions. So I think if the chief growth officer was responsible for marketing and sales, and that person had to look at the metrics of that part of the business, understand how those metrics are going to be met, bring sales and marketing more closely together, incentivize sales and marketing collectively. So incentivization drives behavior, and salespeople know that very well. Marketing isn't incentivized typically the same way as a salesperson is. As a team, they should be incentivized the same way. So if you're going to make someone want to perform well and work hard and burn the midnight hour because they get a commission check if they win some business, get the marketing team on that same plan, because they're doing the same job. They're trying to find a client to sell to. And I think that bit is missing at the moment. The incentivization is different for sales and marketing. So a CGO, chief growth officer, I call it schmarketing, the term is irrelevant. It's the concept of getting them working the same way, incentivized the same way, to achieve the same objective, and to learn along the way, self-learn and self-analyze the data points they're seeing and receiving, ask themselves each of the questions, be the conscience of the other side of the equation. And that's the way it's got to go.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean,
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think fundamentally we need to look at a revenue engine, not a sales and a marketing funnel, as two distinct things. And there are a number of things that you have to set up in order to incentivize that. You're right, absolutely. If you want top performers, you need to give them top pay and you need to give them performance related pay. So having salespeople on double OTEs and marketing that don't get anything isn't going to drive your finding and securing top marketing talent. And similarly, if you have them in silos and you make marketing responsible for these vanity metrics like MQLs, it distorts the behavior. They'll suddenly look to game the system by lowering the quality of the MQLs just to hit their target. And one of the advantages of having a single exec responsible for the revenue engine is they can drive accountability. They know when people are fudging the numbers. And they also have a CRO has got to have a very clear definition of what he expects each one of those groups to bring to the party, whether it's sales, cold outreach, marketing, getting declared intent leads, where buyers are raising their hands saying, I'd like to have a conversation, or whether it's the partner channel. Like there's got to be that accountability, because otherwise everyone's pointing at everyone else going, it's their fault. And that's just a road to nowhere.
Yeah. And I think marketing needs to be the conduit between sales and product. So I think they need to be the feedback loop into product, because products are also saying, are we developing the right products? Are we enhancing it the right way? Do we need to pivot our products to match the market requirement? So I think the feedback loop is sales engage with client tells sales, this is the reason that you've lost this deal. Or if your product could do the following, you've got a better chance of winning. That has to be fed back to marketing to say we need to message, our value proposition to this new ICP that's been identified. And we need the product team to understand that as well. And again, small team of 12, that's perfect. You can shout at each other in the office. 120, split between 3 offices and 6 people are working from home today, that gets missed. So I think that has to be a single, unified C-level person that's looking at each of those 3 individual disciplines saying, do we have a 360-degree loop here? Because if we don't, we're missing out on that opportunity. And that's really, really critical. And I think, look, the other thing we haven't really quite touched on yet from a sales perspective is you're not just selling to a buyer. You're selling to InfoSec, legal, security, risk, compliance, procurement, all of these people who have a job to do. That job is to make it really difficult for you to sell to them because they're risk managing, taking your company and your product into their business, not just from a financial perspective, but from is this going to open us up to a cyber threat? Is this vendor DORA compliant? Is this vendor cyber essentially certified? What supply chain do they use? Because if there's somebody in their supply chain that we're technically buying into our business that has a cyber issue or has a financial issue, and embedded finance has created that challenge. BAS, banking as a service, has created that challenge. We've seen with the Simple's case in America, big legal challenges on the fact that they failed as a bank, but whose fault was it? Well, the supply chain is part of that BAS solution, and that's multiple companies with multiple people, multiple financial issues, multiple cyber vulnerabilities, multiple fraud attacks. You're inheriting not just a product and a firm, but you're inheriting the supply chain. And that's also a big factor now.
It's that is quite a contentious subject, isn't it? Because where there is a failure to secure revenue, the default assumption is that it must be a problem with sales or marketing.
Yeah.
And not that maybe there is an issue with the product. And the whole product market fit equation assumes that you have a product that solves a problem that the market cares about and that you can communicate that value effectively. Only half of that is a sales and marketing issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, good old days of escrow where the legal team would say, what happens if you go bust? Well, you can have our source code in escrow. Perfect when it was an on-premise, but SaaS subscription, where does that software sit? It's built in the cloud. How do I get access to the source code? So yeah, there's lots of pitfalls that sales teams need to go through with their finance team, their own legal team, their risk, their procurement, the challenges are getting higher. The barrier to entry is getting more difficult. But I think the points we talked about today in terms of the psychology of selling, the process of selling, the positioning of yourself and your company through marketplaces, there's ways to do this more effectively. I just think quite a few firms that I deal with are quite blinkered in how you do this, and they don't look for help from the outside in. I think that's a big challenge for them as well.
Yeah, I agree. Antony, we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming in. Hey, everyone. If you like the Hive Mind and want to see more, please take a moment to click like and subscribe. There should be a link somewhere on the screen. Thanks.